So we're hip-hopping from different slots and different sectors, all with a vast array of exciting companies doing really innovative things in their respective spaces. A lovely mix this morning of larger companies that have more history, I guess, and different types of structures, and then a whole bunch of super exciting, extremely agile entrepreneurs. And the next speaker is absolutely no exception. Our next speaker is a serial entrepreneur, starting out in the ed tech space, flew all the way in from San Francisco and Silicon Valley to be with here, a first-timer at South Summit, which we're really, really excited about. Our next speaker was originally founder of U2, one of the fastest-growing ed tech companies in history, which actually IPO'd in 2014, and now he's shifted his new challenge into a super exciting opportunity and an interesting problem. We see, for example, in the tech space, particularly in Silicon Valley, a huge shortage of technical talent, right? There's companies there firing it out and fighting each other to make sure they have access to the right type of technical talent. And this company has figured out a really, really interesting way to solve that problem, innovating in the future of work and how that is distributed. So it is my absolute pleasure and privilege to invite Jeremy Johnson, founder of Andela, to the stage. Please, Jeremy, join us on stage. Excellent. Thanks a million. Great to have you here.
Hello, South Summit. I hear that yesterday you had royalty from the Netherlands dancing the Macarena on stage. Apologies in advance, that will be tough to top. What we are here to talk about is a story. It's a story that you're all actually already part of, but it's moving pretty quickly. How many folks here, by a show of hands, have at least one person on their team or in their company that doesn't work from the office? So it looks like about a third of you, which makes sense. As of this year, a third of developers, software developers around the world, report that they work from home at least one day a week. We think of distributed as being this new system, this new way of working, and it's actually part of something that's been happening for quite some time, but is accelerating dramatically, especially over the past 5 years. As you can see here, just in the US alone, you've gone in the past 10 years, you've more than doubled the number of folks working in a distributed fashion. Why is that relevant for Andela? Well, a number of you may have read about us recently. It didn't hurt that Zuckerberg, through CZI, personally led our Series B and came to visit our campus in Lagos, Nigeria a few weeks ago. But what you probably don't understand or probably haven't seen is the degree to which this trend and this opportunity, this ability to leverage education to scale distributed teams is happening as a result of this trend right here. That is the rise of distributed workforces. Between 1995 and 2015, yes, 300% growth, but more importantly, companies that approach distributed in a serious way, that actually look at it and say, well, what if we could think of not just one-off opportunities, but rather, what if we were to think of significant chunks of our team as being able to be a little bit more mobile, are experiencing over $10,000 individually in savings. Over time, that becomes less of a personal decision and more of companies realizing, this is something we have to take seriously. It's not just because Automatic, the parent company of WordPress, is entirely distributed, or GitHub and Stack Overflow now are half distributed. It's because this is something that, from a business sense, is absolutely imperative. Most people, when they think of distributed, think of what is traditionally known as outsourcing. This approach, the one that Andela and others in this space would argue is the way to move forward, is actually very, very different. Traditional outsourcing looks an awful lot like taking a 20-page spec, writing it down, thinking about everything that could happen, throwing it over a wall, and hoping that it comes back looking something like what you were imagining. Who's experienced one of those horror stories? I feel like the people raising their hands right now are the CTOs in the room. Yes, many, many folks have. The current model, and what I would argue the future of work will be, looks very, very different. Instead of thinking of this is the team across the ocean, the current model distributed actually thinks about teamwork in the exact same way you would if we were working together and happened to be on opposite sides of Madrid. You wake up in the morning and you take part in the same daily stand-up. You're using the same email, you're on Slack or using Trello. You're engaging as a full team member so that you're able to work in real time, which actually turns out to be a really important part of making this system work. What you lose, though, and everything has pluses and minuses, what you lose is the ease of simply building rapport, the ease of water cooler conversations. And the challenge there is that while you can get great work done, trust is a meaningful variable in the productivity of teams. Seems strange, turns out it's actually true. Trust really matters. If you trust your team, you are much more likely to worry less about the tasks that you're giving them or the ideas that you're asking them to work through. And so you need to find ways, even in distributed teams, to build that trust. For Andela, what we do is actually bring developers from around Africa to companies like Microsoft, Facebook, Google, for a short period of time at the beginning of that partnership. Also now, a few dozen different venture-backed startups around the world, mostly in the US, but Belgium, Brazil as well. And we enable those people to work side by side for a period of a few weeks, typically, before they then go back to their home country and operate out of an Andela campus. So very different from your traditional model of outsourcing, but in a way, it allows you to replicate some of the ways that you build trust and rapport in face-to-face conversations and communication that are still difficult in a remote world. But we don't just exist right here, right now. This exists along a timeline. Why is this particularly relevant and a little bit humbling? Well, Andela's had 45,000 applicants over the past 2 years. 45,000. We've accepted just under 0.7%. CNN has called it, the startup is harder to get into than Harvard. And it's born of a very simple principle. We know, statistically, that brilliance and problem solving is pretty evenly distributed around the world. Opportunity, not so much. And as a result of that, the chance of someone being top 2% aptitude is about 2%. And so by looking for developers in countries like Nigeria, like Kenya, around the continent of Africa, which we believe is the largest pool of untapped brainpower in the world, Andela is able to find the kind of folks that you'd love to have on your team who, had they been born in India, would have ended up at the IITs or the US top technical institutions, Caltech, MIT. But those people become Andela developers. I've done okay. It is questionable whether I would get into Andela right now, and has been for about a year. The benefit of distributed is that you're no longer just looking for the best person for a given role within 20 miles of your home. This is particularly relevant if you're also servicing or working with people from around the world. It gives you a chance to look for the best person, period, for a role. And that's a very, very different set of applicants for your companies. There are 1.8 million open IT jobs in the US right now. That is not going to be filled naturally. You look around Europe, you have a similar number of open IT jobs, the fastest growing sector of our economy. You look around, see the folks here at South Summit. There's a reason there's so much activity around tech, so much interest around tech. It is the fastest growing segment of almost every economy. And yet our traditional universities don't do a great job of creating pathways into technology for workers around the world. Distributed offers a different opportunity. It means that Ruby on Rails job that's been open for 6 months, and you started to question, am I ever going to find someone for this? Well, if you think a little more broadly about where that person can come from, you start to realize there are pools of talent that the traditional players in the ecosystem, traditional companies, have not been looking at, and are opportunities for your companies. Let me tell you about a friend of mine. Tolu was part of Andela's second class. And after about 6 months, she's from Lagos, Nigeria, 25 years old. After about 6 months of working with Andela, was partnered with fairly well-known venture-backed startup in New York as a full-time React and JavaScript developer. But it didn't start off as React. The company at that point was just starting to think through how they would leverage React, which, for those of you who don't know, is a new JavaScript framework that Facebook has been, that launched and has been very actively involved with. The company was thinking through how they use React in their platform. How could they start to integrate it a little bit more? Tolu decided that in the month between when she was placed and when she was going to start, she was going to teach herself React, so that when she started with this company, she was able to walk them through how they could approach it and how they could think through the best way to implement. How many folks expect that of developers coming into a new environment? The answer is, in most places, they don't. But Tolu wasn't confined by a traditional set of expectations. She grew up in a different environment, and because of that, saw the world through a slightly different lens. And that seemed totally natural to her. Another example, Faisal. Faisal is from Togo. Togo, for those who don't know, is part of Francophone West Africa. He grew up speaking French. But he realized midway through high school that, wait a second, it seems like the world of software development is mostly in English. Stack Overflow, mostly in English. Maybe I should just learn English. And he taught himself English in order to be a better software developer. I know a bunch of folks from fancy universities who wouldn't have even thought of that. When you think a little bit more broadly about the different types of cultures that people can come from, there are different approaches to how they engage in work and how they throw themselves at solving new problems. And some people look at that as a challenge, but the best companies in the world understand that the value of diversity is actually in being able to bring together people with different backgrounds and experiences to solve problems more creatively than they otherwise would be able to. Distributed teams increasingly will be a critical part of making things like that happen. Now, the average age here, I'm told, is in the late 20s. So that means that most of you probably don't even know what this is. That's why I put a label on it here. This is called a fax machine. And it wasn't all that long ago that this was one of the most effective ways to rapidly communicate with people around you. Fast forward, and what we've learned of distributed teams, I promise I'll come right back to that. What we've learned is that as you start moving towards being able to communicate in real time, you replicate many of the advantages that come from operating in a small group environment, operating in a small team. the more you can operate in real time, the more you can engage with people directly. One-on-one, rapid fire, I had an idea, wanted to chat with you about it. How are we going to make this work? The more effective your team becomes. But go back 30 years, and it was pretty difficult to engage in any way that felt like a natural form of communication, natural conversation. Move up to the current, and you can use systems like Slack, like Trello, like Jira, like Pivotal Tracker to manage both the communication style of a team, but also better understand the output of each individual on that team. As you're better able to understand that output, you're better able to understand exactly what a given person is contributing, and you care less about where they are physically located. There's a very natural evolution that we are all part of. When you fast forward, by 2030, less than 15 years from now, we're going to be able to create virtual experiences that feel like sitting in this room right now, but I could still be in New York or San Francisco. And you could be in London or Berlin. But it will feel like we are here together right now. So we've come for a very specific reason. We've come to be together in person. Because there's something magic about that. And I want everyone to think about that. You've all spent real time and energy and resources to be here right now all together. If we fast forward less than 15 years, we'll be able to replicate this experience. Imagine what that means for a standard work meeting. Imagine what it means for being able to engage with teams from around the world. Imagine what that means when it comes to who you're able to work with if you don't have the limitations of not being able to have that water cooler conversation. As systems evolve, we're moving towards a world where it's not just a possibility that distributed will continue. We're part of an inevitable movement that will ultimately result, without question, in the feeling of being able to experience this and being able to experience teams as if we were all together without having to physically be in the same location. Which means distributed isn't a trend, distributed isn't a possibility. Distributed and virtual reality will drive this fully. Distributed is actually how all of us will be engaging by the time current high school students are our age, thinking about conferences like this. Thank you all, and please, if you take nothing else from this, know that right now the question is not whether we will move to distributed, it's when and how far behind companies will be as others in their space get to the point where they realize, oh, wait a second, we can actually operate in this fashion. Automatic, GitHub, Stack Overflow, they may be a little bit ahead of the curve, but there's enough time to move in that direction, to take it seriously, and to actually embrace finding the best team members possible for each of your companies. And as you think about how you scale, whether you're based here in Madrid, somewhere else in Europe, in the US, or in Africa, brilliance is evenly distributed, and there are great people and great talent around the world that would be excited to be very active, dedicated members of your team, and that's a win-win for everyone. Thank you all.